In class this morning. Thank you all for coming. We're going to start in lesson 4, the effects of sin on God's good creation. That'll be on page 23. Page 23. We've got a lot of, all right. Hello everybody. We have a lot of time we're going to cover in today's lesson. We're going to go through Cain and Abel, we're going to go through the flood, and we're going to go through the Tower of Babel. So there's a lot of history in there. He doesn't make us read through the genealogy, but you can feel free to do that on your own time if you'd like. We're not going to get through that today if we started it. I guess we'll just get right into it. I'm going to start on page 23 in the warm-up. The first 11 chapters of Genesis's record history, from the creation to the time of Abraham, of all the events that took place during this time, only a few snapshots were recorded. Unfortunately, what we see is not a pretty picture. The sin that Adam and Eve brought into the world grew and spread through their descendants to the point that God grieved that he had even made mankind. Even in these sad stories, however, there is still hope. God has never given up entirely on mankind. God still wants us to have a close relationship with human beings. And as we will see as we continue our study, God had a plan to make this possible. Cain and Abel, Genesis 4, 1 through 12. And I'm going to read Genesis 4, 1 through 12. Why not? So everybody will turn to Genesis 4. I'm going to start in verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. And she bore again, and this time his brother Abel. Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said, Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be in the earth. Cain asks for him to, lower the punishment. He says punishment's too great. He can't bear it. The Lord says that he's going to put a mark on Cain, and those that kill Cain, he'll have his revenge on them sevenfold. Okay. So we're going to go back to the book on page 24. The first of these snapshots is the story of Cain and Abel. Time has passed, and these two sons of Adam and Eve have grown up. Cain became a farmer, and Abel cared for the flocks of animals. At a certain point, Cain and Abel brought sacrifices to God. One was accepted, but the other was not. Why was Abel's sacrifice accepted, but not Cain's? How did they know what was acceptable? Although we are not given any details, they must have been told by God how to make sacrifices. How else could God hold them responsible? Some writers have suggested that Cain's sacrifice was not accepted because it was not an animal sacrifice. The original word for sacrifice, however, can refer to either an animal sacrifice or some type of grain offering. The difference seems to be how the offerings were given and not what was given. Abel gave the most valuable of his possessions. The expressions fat pieces and firstborn indicate that this was the best from his flocks. There's no indication that this was true of Cain. We read that Cain brought only some of the fruits of the soil. In more modern terms, the story illustrates contrasting worldviews. A worldview is a way that a particular person looks at the world. Cain had a human-centered worldview that said, I'm the boss and I will do it my way. Abel had a God-centered worldview that said, God is the boss, I will do it his way. In this sense, the story is timeless because people today have similar worldviews. Some people choose to put God first in their lives, but unfortunately, many are like Cain and want to make themselves the boss. In verse 7, we see that Cain had a choice. He could have chosen to serve God, but instead he followed his own way. The key to understanding the story is in the New Testament. Sadly, Cain is remembered only for his disobedience, but Abel is remembered for his faith. Cain made a mistake, and he could have made it right. Instead, Cain allowed his anger to lead to further sin. In the end, he did something terribly wrong by killing his brother. Dad, can you read 1 John 3:12? Thank you.
Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brother's righteous.
Thank you. And then I'm going to read Hebrews 11, verse 4. Which says, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks." That the idea here, that Cain's sacrifice was bad and Abel's sacrifice was good. Well, why was it? Because Abel offered the best of what he had. Abel gave everything to God. And Cain said, well, I'll give you, here's some stuff, And, it's interesting because God talks to him that there's this conversation between God and Cain where Cain's angry and he says, why are you angry? I would accept your sacrifices. Like, it's not like God didn't curse Cain before he cursed him. It was after he sinned. He said, I would accept your sacrifices. You just need to do what's right. And he says, sin wants you, and it wants to rule over you, but you should rule over your sin. You should rule over your desires. And Cain didn't listen. Cain was overtaken by his anger and overtaken by his, desires. That's what God warned him about. He got, talk about having godly counsel. He had the counsel of God. God said, hey, you can still do right. We can fix this. You don't need to be angry. And he said, nope. And he went out and killed his brother. And that's how sin can blind you, I guess, Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm not so sure it was just the attitude that Cain had. I think he brought the wrong thing.
Really?
Meat offering means meat offering. And it's way further down in the definition, it says grain offering. So it's initially, first and foremost, a meat offering.
Okay.
He brought the wrong thing. And that was because of his attitude, perhaps. I have this, I've grown this. And
This is what I made.
Yeah,
You don't like what I did?
Think about how hard it was to grow it.
Yeah.
It's been cursed. And so it would have been difficult for him to have produced this. But it wasn't what God said. And it doesn't matter what our intentions are, what we think is the best. God says this is what's best. And I think that was the response to him. If you do what's right, you'll be accepted. If you do what I tell you, you'll be accepted. Don't do it again.
Yeah, I'm willing to go there, to say, well, whether Cain's attitude didn't offer the best, or maybe he wasn't following what God wanted, I think that's, yes.
Well, the other part that's astounding to me is that Cain decided to take whatever his inner inhibitions was, his disobedience, out on his brother.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted somebody else or something else to be the blame, for which he couldn't handle himself.
Well, it was the jealousy there, really, that his brother was getting all this praise and God was blessing him, and he's, like, well, God's not accepting what I gave him. Why is that brother of mine getting everything and I'm not? Well, then he decided to take it out on him. That woman, that brother. Yeah. Well.
Hey, Brendan, if you get mad at your brothers, you've got two different ones you can take it out on.
I know. I was going to say I got a few more options. I can spread it out between the two of them, not murder either one. Maybe that was their strategy.
I was going to say, brothers are good at aggravating each other and
Yeah.
making them mad.
I've taken anger out on my brothers before. You know, I mean, it's, you know, like, well, not saying it's a good thing, but it is. I've never wanted to murder them, but it's like, you know, obviously you can understand where Cain's coming from, I guess, where it is like, you know, why did he take it out on his brother? It's like, well, there's nobody else to take it out on anyway. I mean, his mom and dad and Abel, as far as we know, are the only ones there that are listed up to this point. So it's like, okay, well, there's 4 people, and one of them's my brother, and God's saying he's doing a great job, and God's saying I'm not doing a great job. Well, I don't like that very much. So, anything else?
One more thing. I don't remember where I read this, but the verse about the voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. I remember reading this. I don't remember where it said, but I had heard that there was an interpretation of this that it wasn't like his blood, just his blood. It was all of his descendants too. I think that adds a little more to it.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, he cut off his whole line. And obviously, I mean, there's so much about genealogies at the beginning, and you know, when he told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, well, does that not also apply to their descendants? That they are also given that blessing to be fruitful and multiply? And that's the reality of sin. You know, he cut off not only Abel, but his children's children's children, you know. So, yeah. Anything else? Yes?
We're descendants of Cain.
No. We're descendants of Seth. Yes. Yeah, no, I was like, well, actually, I believe I have that right.
Adam and Eve had more children.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, that's when I was like, well, as far as we know, that was only Abel and Cain, but it's like, well, then Cain left and got married, so
Well, first of all.
how does that make sense?
They had to be older to be doing the things they did. One being a farmer, one being a ship. Yeah, I mean, you think.
Yeah.
And then the fact that later on it says that Cain has to go to Lot. Well, that means presumably there's probably more people around, so.
And you'd assume they were into adulthood, yeah.
To multiply, there could be a lot more people in the world. At the time.
Yeah. I would agree. Anything else? Okay. If nothing else, we're going to move on to the flood. On page 25, the story of Genesis moves on quickly to the next snapshot. At the end of chapter 4, we read of another child of Adam and Eve. His name is Seth, and his descendants will be important characters for the rest of the story of Genesis. In the beginning of chapter 6, we read about the sons of God and the daughters of men. Genesis 6, verses 1 through 2. The term sons of God refers sometimes to angels, but here the term likely refers to the godly descendants of Seth. Through the daughters of men probably refers to the descendants of Cain. The descendants of Seth led to Abraham and the children of Israel. Cain's descendants were noted only for their sinfulness. The union of these two groups only led to more sin. In fact, they are described as thinking of nothing but sin in Genesis 6, verses 5 through 6. In verse 6, human emotions are used to describe God's reaction to the sinfulness of mankind. He was grieved, and his heart was filled with pain because of mankind's sinfulness. In chapter 2, we see God making man and woman, planting a garden for them, and sharing a close personal relationship with them. The rebellion of Adam and Eve and the broken relationship that we see in chapter 3, however, eventually led to the point that God was sorry that he had made mankind and planned to destroy them. There was one exception. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah's life is contrasted with those around him, and he is described as a righteous man, blameless, and one who walked with God. Because God found Noah to be a godly man, he decided to not destroy mankind entirely. Instead, he chose the family of Noah to continue the human race that he had created. God sent a terrible flood to destroy mankind, but Noah and his family were spared. After the flood, Noah made sacrifices to God, Genesis 8:18 through 22. And God made a covenant with Noah and all mankind, Genesis 9, verses 8 through 17. In Bible times, a covenant was an agreement made between two parties, much like a business contract today. This is the first covenant between God and human beings mentioned in the Bible. It is an unconditional covenant in which God promised never again to destroy the earth by flood. The sign of this covenant we still see today in the rainbow. Okay. So, I would assume most of us are familiar with the story of the flood and Noah. Any thoughts on this? Anything anybody wants to say? Yes?
I wonder, you read this and it looks like it's real short, like just a few weeks. But how many years have passed since the time that, Cain slew Abel and all these people are on the earth? They all had to come from Adam and Eve, from those three. And all these people, there was a lot of years passed
Yeah.
during this time. I just wonder if we really have any idea how much time has passed since that time to the time of Noah and all that. Because there's been a lot of people lived on this earth, and they expanded, it grew quickly. I just wonder how much real time is going on.
Well, we may be able to figure that out if we work through the genealogies, but it gets complicated, I think, especially after the flood or I guess Babel on to Abraham. It's like there's not genealogies there, and so it's like, well, how much time is from there to there? Because if you look up the timeline on that, it is a little gray, I guess.
Chapter 7 and verse 6 says that Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water come down. So there's 600 years.
Yeah.
That it was passing for people to be put on there. Don't know the number of years before that Cain lived.
There's a timeline you can kind of get from the flood on. We have, especially after Abraham, we had the genealogy, we pretty well know timeline. It seemed like there's not much timeline before that time. We don't have that specific thing. How old was? He was 600. But how many years before that? Whenever after he was born, wherever his generations down the line too. I just wonder. I've always wondered about that.
Well, I was going to say the trick would be in Genesis 5, verse 4, after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years. So after 130 years, Adam had Seth. And then, he lived for 800 years. Or maybe 800 after that. In total, 930 years when he died. But he was 130 when he had Seth. Seth was 105 when he had Enosh. And you can work your way through that all the way to Noah. And so we can get a pretty good number on that, I think. Yes?
Google here, it says it was 1,656 years past from the creation of Adam to the great flood.
Okay, 1656? There you go. So, I was going to say, you can do it, it's just a lot of math. I wasn't going to do it up here.
You get quite a few kids in that time.
Yeah, could have a lot of kids in 1600 years. Yeah.
Brendan, I think maybe it's because that recorded in the Bible that we go from one thing to the flood really soon, and we don't have as much, which gives us more the impression of a short time.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, that it reads like it wasn't that long, and then we're like, oh, it was 1600 years. It's like, well, that's, from Jesus to when America was colonized. Like that's that big of a gap as there was from Seth to Noah. I feel like we don't think about it like that, to go, how much time has passed from when Jesus died to, the 1600s when, the Pilgrims got here. That's how much time there was. We don't feel like we're close to, that was 400 years ago. So we don't feel like we're close to when Jesus came back. But then, if you think about it, that's the same amount of time there was from the flood from Seth to the flood. So, it happened. I was going to say, and regardless of the time, it's kind of, it's interesting to talk about, but I'm going to open up a can of worms here. It says at the beginning of chapter 6, we read about the sons of God and the daughters of men. The term sons of God sometimes refers to angels, but here the term likely refers to godly descendants of Seth. Through the daughters of men probably refers to the descendants of Cain. The descendants of Seth led to Abraham, the children of Israel. Cain's descendants were noted only for their sinfulness. Now, many people will take this and say, what about Genesis 6 and the sons of God? Where many people go with this?
That they were angels.
And many people say the Nephilim, or the, what is the word they have here? Giants is the word in here. Fallen or mighty ones that is a way a lot of people go. They'll say, well, it was angels that, had kids with men, and then they had giants as children. And I think it's difficult to get away with that, because if you go to Numbers 13, verse 32, the same word was used when the spies were sent to look at the land of Canaan. Start in verse 31, actually. Numbers 13, verse 31. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. They gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, and said, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, or in Hebrew, Nephilim. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And so then there's this complicated of, if you wanted to say it was angels slept with women in Genesis 6, are you also saying that then for into Numbers after the flood, that this is continued on, who are this race of giants? It gets into this complicated picture, I guess. Any thoughts on this?
Matthew 22, Jesus' question about a hypothetical woman who has 7 husbands and they all die. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? And his response is, they neither married nor are married, but are like the angels in heaven. The reason for marriage is, there's a couple of reasons. Companionship and children. I don't need companionship in heaven because we're all going to be there. And I don't need to have children. And so if I'm going to be like the angels, not an angel, like the angels, I'm not able to marry and have children. So if the angels can't have children, they can't come to this earth and have children.
Well, it'd be like, well, are angels spiritual beings? Well, then can they, not to be graphic, but can they have sex? That's where we go, well, and you're like, okay, well, does that make any sense?
No, and that's, it's reading too much into Genesis. You've got righteous people.
I think there's a big jump there, yeah, where you go.
And they're intermarrying. And what the result is, sadly, is the unrighteous influence the righteous. And that's the sad result of it. the end result ultimately is wickedness on the earth. So it's frustrating to think that there's something that the angels did in Genesis that they don't do any other time in the history of the world. And it just doesn't fit with what the Lord said.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
It was becoming a very sinful world.
Yeah, absolutely. For God to be grieved that he made man. Must not have been very good.
God was displeased.
All right, we're going to go through the Tower of Babel, and then we'll be able to get to the cool down and the discussion questions. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, 1 through 9. Time had passed since the flood, another gap. Noah and his family had been spared, and his descendants had increased in number. The flood and its destruction should have been a powerful lesson, but sadly mankind had not changed. The whole world in verse 1 refers to the descendants of Noah. These are all of those who were living at the same time, or at the time. They knew what had happened in the past. Some of them lived in obedience, but others ignored God. Instead of living under God's rule, they planned to make themselves great. They wanted to build a city and a tower, probably a pyramid-like structure like a ziggurat, that they would reach the heavens with. Their plans were egotistical and proud. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Once again, mankind had become rebellious and sought to ignore God and put themselves in charge. At this point, God could have decided to destroy mankind and completely wipe the earth clean of all human beings. It was only because of God's mercy and grace that he did not do so. Instead of destroying mankind again, God confused them. Kind of a first thought here, kind of a poor way to word the end of that, to say, well, God didn't destroy God didn't destroy mankind because of his mercy and grace. Well, he showed that mercy and grace earlier with Noah when he says, I'm not going to destroy the world again with a flood. So it's like, okay, well, he could have destroyed the whole world. Well, he could do that at any point. It's not really a, yes?
You're talking about the timeline, okay. Between Adam and the end of the Old Testament, how many years about is that?
I don't know.
And then from Christ on, so whatever it is, it throws out the idea that a lot of people that study science say, the world is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old.
6,000, 5,500 years between creation and Jesus, maybe.
As it is like 4,000 about years from Adam and Eve to the end of the Old Testament.
About 4,000 years.
Yep.
From the time of
Adam and Eve to the end of the Old Testament. Yeah. No, to the end of the Old Testament.
Okay. 4,000 years there?
Now, then you add Jesus on to now, that'd be another 2,000.
6,000.
That'd get you about 6,000.
If you're one of those young earthers, I'm worried about 8,000.
Oh, I like them young. I want 5,000. Yeah, we're going 10 years old. That's a good point.
Yeah.
If we say it's 6,000, 10,000, it's okay. Like, well, that doesn't, the timeline that God gave us doesn't line up with the timeline that we've made. So what do you do about that? Do you go with the modern theory on it, or do you go with, what God outlined, where God said, well, it was this many years from this to this many years from this to this many years from this to this. Well, you can call God a liar, or you can believe him. And I think that there's greater evidence to believe God's not lying.
By faith, we believe the world's framed by the Word of God.
Amen. There you go. So, yeah. All right. We're going to go through the cool down, and then we'll get to the discussion questions. Human beings were the crown and glory of God's creation. Man and woman had been made in God's image and lived in a perfect world free from sin and the evils of our world. They had also shared a close personal relationship with God that we can only imagine. The man and woman were also given the ability to choose, and unfortunately they made a bad decision that brought sin, death, and evil into the world. The early chapters of Genesis show us that after this, mankind repeatedly failed to live in obedience and harmony with God and continued to rebel against Him. We saw this in the brief episodes of the first recorded murder, the sinfulness of those who lived before the flood, and the rebellious attitudes of those who attempted to build the Tower of Babel. Now for the good news. God never gave up on mankind. Instead, He had a plan. God could have completely wiped out mankind at any time, but instead He showed His grace. This is a subject that is more commonly found in the New Testament, but we see the first evidence of God's forgiving grace in these early pages of Genesis. Okay, time for the discussion questions. We're going to go with the first one. What was Cain's basic problem? Yeah.
Pride, arrogance.
Exactly. I would say, why does he want to do his things his way? Because he's prideful, because he's arrogant, because he said, is God too good for what I'm giving him? Yes. Yes, He is. Can people today have that same type of problem? Yes. People today still are prideful and arrogant. That's not that didn't go away with Cain. We can be, and that can be in, a lot of different ways, whether that's in, our relationships with one another, or if that's in our relationship with God, where we say, maybe I'm not going to give God everything. Or maybe, you say, well, this is how I want to worship versus, what we believe that God said how we should worship. Okay, well, there's a certain level of, pride there to say, well, this is how I'm going to do it. Any other thoughts? Okay. Question number 2. What does Cain's negative example teach us about sin and how it progresses?
Well, it teaches that once it gets in your heart, if you don't try to correct it, it'll just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And to the point where you think, yeah, I did nothing wrong, God will forgive me.
Absolutely, yeah. That there's this development of sin. Jesus talked about if your brother, you've already committed murder in your heart. Well, what's the what does Cain's example teach us and how it progresses? Well, he went from being prideful and arrogant to being a murderer. Well, why? How'd that happen? Because of the sin, because he didn't correct it, because he didn't correct himself. God told him, you just need to do what's right, and I'll, if you do what's right, I'm not going to have a problem with you.
And none of his descendants were ever faithful either.
Yeah.
His whole family line was sinful in their nature. So what we do doesn't just affect us.
Mm-hmm.
It affects our family and those that are coming later in life.
Yeah, absolutely. That our sins can impact our children, Anything else? Okay. What is the basic concept of offering and sacrifice in the New Testament? How is this different from the Old Testament? So we're going to start with the first question there. Or, we'll do it in reverse order. I don't like how he did it. So how did sacrifice work in the Old Testament?
Animal sacrifice.
Usually animal sacrifice. They brought the animal to the altar, killed it. It was the best of it.
1 year at a time.
1 year at a time. Pushed back the sins for a year. And it wasn't a forgiving. It didn't forgive their sins, but, push it back a year, push it back a year, push it back a year. And then how is that different than offering and sacrifice in the New Testament? Do we still slay calves and goats? Yes, that Christ was our sacrifice once for all man, for all sin, that he died on the cross, and that was our sacrifice that God made on our behalf.
You know, Gail brought up, it's hard to, how did this happen? And I agree with you. Here's another instance. Can you imagine all the animals, things being sacrificed? I mean, it's just, I can't imagine.
Yep. It would have been a lot of blood, a lot of animals. I mean, yeah. Well, they be a good reminder, I guess. Okay. What is the significance of God's covenant with Noah? How does this reflect God's nature? So first off, what was God's covenant with Noah? Yes, in Genesis 9, verse 8. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons, saying, And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So that's the basic part of the covenant with Noah. What's the significance of God's covenant with Noah? Being destroyed by a flood again, yeah. Yeah, the significance is that God said, I'm not going to destroy the world with a flood again. He's not going to start over again with one family. He didn't say he was going to do that.
He never
Good.
said
That's good for us.
any more floods.
Mhm.
He just said he'd never destroy the earth again.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly still floods,
It's a good reminder once in a while that maybe if you got into the Bible and done a little research, you find out that it's very grateful that these floods we have nowadays are not the flood they had.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's also a reminder when we see a rainbow, reminds you of God's promises.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I put it there,
We all get happy when we see a rainbow.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't think about the significance.
You don't think, that's God telling me he's not going to destroy the world with a flood again. So. And it's, so the world didn't have rain on it before the flood. And, obviously after the flood we have rain now. But, you think about Noah and his family, and they get off the ark, and the first time it rained again, the last time it rained, everyone they knew died. So, the next time it rained, there wasn't perhaps the terror that would have been there when, the rainbow appears. If they go, well, there's God's sign. God remembers he wasn't going to destroy us. That's why the rainbow's there. Now, how does this reflect God's nature? He keeps his promises, yes. We still haven't been destroyed in a flood yet. There you go.
And that he's very forgiving.
He's forgiving. Yeah, that he knew that man was going to sin again. And yet he still, said, I'm not going to destroy the world with a flood again. I mean, obviously he knew that what had happened before, the world was full of sin. Well, people are always going to sin.
Well, look at Noah, I think, wasn't too long right after the flood.
No, it wasn't too long. And he got drunk and naked.
Think
It's like he wasn't perfect. And there's another thought for you. Noah was spared, and Noah wasn't a perfect man. It doesn't say Noah was without sin, and that's why he was saved. It says Noah was righteous. It said he was godly. It didn't say he was perfect. Another thing about God's nature in there is that he knows that we, worry perhaps with the rainbow, that he gave a sign that he would not destroy the world again. That obviously they have this feeling, well, he destroyed the world once. What's going to stop him from doing it again? Well, he says, well, I won't do it again. And, I'll have the rainbow there as a sign of our covenant. And that shows his care for us, that he knows that we're worryful, I guess. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What was the attitude of the people who built the Tower of Babel? How often do we see this attitude today?
Back to what Justice said, arrogance and pride.
Yeah.
They want to be equal to God. They thought they could do it.
Yeah. They said, we'll make a name for ourselves. We wouldn't be like God. Is that not what Eve wanted? They wanted to elevate themselves up higher to be like God. That's exactly what Eve fell into. And Adam with her. So it's not, they weren't the first ones to do it either. Do we see that attitude today of arrogance and pride? Yes. Yep. So.
I think part of the problem with the scientific world is that they keep looking for answers. In some ways, it's subtle things that they want to be equal to God. They won't take in that God done it all, so they're going to find a reason why they can explain why it happened.
Yeah.
I wonder if these people were seeing what God was doing. Or, he talks about here, God was showing his power and everything. But at the same time, he was also trying to teach them. And I wonder how the people were catching, were they catching on quick or not? I know. Some of them might.
I guess not.
But he's teaching lessons constantly through the Old Testament.
Yep. And God was still speaking to people directly at this time. And he spoke to Noah directly. He spoke to Cain directly. Could he not have, like you said, he didn't leave them in darkness for the time from Noah to the Tower of Babel. But, they chose to disobey him. In this lesson, we have seen several examples of sin and disobedience. Why didn't God just give up on mankind? In what ways do we see God's grace in these sad incidents? So we'll start with the first one. Why didn't God give up on mankind?
It's part of the creation.
Yeah, because he thought we were the best because he loved us. I believe Roger said it's grace and love, right? Yeah. Why didn't he give up on mankind? Because he loved us. Why did he send his son to die for us? Because he loved us. In what ways do we see God's grace in these sad incidents? That he had mercy. These are incidents over and over again of sin, pride, arrogance, murder. Patient, yeah. That he said, okay, well, I can work something out. He was determined to. He saw the good in man even when we were still full of sin and continuing in it. That he still had that same loving and merciful attitude. All right. Oh, that's all I got. Class dismissed.